You don't get to the top without breaking a few rules and stepping on a few toes. That's what I told myself whenever doubt crept in. Every success, every contract won, every award on the shelf behind my desk, it all came at a cost. A necessary one, or so I believed. But when Ezra Calloway walked into my office that afternoon, everything I thought I knew about control, power, and the rules of the game started to unravel. It was a Monday, a day like any other. I was behind my desk, skimming through quarterly reports, my assistant Claire buzzing about the upcoming board meeting. The sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors of my corner office. Everything was in order, perfect, as always. And then Claire's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Strathmore, there's a visitor here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." I frowned. "Who is it?" "He says his name is Ezra Calloway." The name didn't register. "Did he say what it's about?" "No, sir, but he insists it's urgent." I hesitated. My days were meticulously planned, each minute accounted for. Unscheduled visitors were rare and unwelcome, but something in Claire's tone gave me pause. "Send him in," I said, my curiosity piqued. The door opened, and in walked a man who didn't belong in my world. He wasn't polished or sharp like the executives I dealt with daily. He wore a simple black coat over a faded button-up shirt, dark jeans, and scuffed boots. His face was angular, framed by a shadow of stubble, and his piercing gray eyes seemed to cut right through me. "Mr. Strathmore," he said, his voice calm but firm, "thank you for seeing me." "I don't believe we've met," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "What can I do for you, Mr. Calloway?" He smiled faintly, but it wasn't the kind of smile that puts you at ease. It was calculated, almost amused. "Oh, we've met," he said, "though I doubt you'd remember. You tend not to, with people like me." I narrowed my eyes, trying to place him. His face tugged at something deep in my memory, but I couldn't pull it to the surface. "I'm sorry, I don't recall. You'll have to remind me." He took a step closer, his gaze never wavering. 10 years ago, Hastings Financial. You were an up-and-coming manager back then, climbing the ranks. I was just another name on a list, a junior analyst. Recognition hit me like a jolt. Hastings Financial, my first real power play. The company was struggling, and I'd been brought in to clean house. It had been brutal. Layoffs, restructuring, entire departments gutted. Necessary moves, I'd told myself. "You're here because of that?" I said, trying to sound dismissive. "That was a long time ago." "Not for me," he replied. Something about his tone made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet, unnerving intensity. "I'm not here to dwell on the past," he continued, taking a seat without being invited. "I'm here because of what comes next." "And what exactly is that?" I asked, my patience thinning. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Opportunity, redemption, call it what you want. I have something you need, and you have something I want. Let's cut to the chase, Mr. Calloway," I said. "What do you want?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin folder, sliding it across my desk. I opened it, my eyes scanning the contents. A series of proposals, financial reports, and legal documents. My company's name was on every page, along with a detailed plan to dismantle it piece by piece. "You've been busy," I said, my voice colder now. "Preparation is key," he said, his tone still maddeningly calm. "I've spent the last decade building a network, gathering resources, and positioning myself, all for this moment." "To what end?" I demanded, though I already knew. "To take what's mine," he said simply. I stared at him, a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling inside me. "You think you can just walk in here and save it?" he interrupted, his voice cutting through mine. "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to give you a choice." He stood, his shadow looming over my desk. "You can fight me, waste your time and money trying to stop what's already in motion, or you can work with me. Let me fix the mess you've made, and in doing so, save yourself. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. This was no ordinary grudge. Ezra Calloway hadn't just come to settle a score, he'd come to take over. "What makes you think I'll agree to any of this?" I asked, my voice icy. He smiled again, that same unsettling smile. "Because deep down, you know I've already won. This isn't about revenge, Mr. Strathmore. It's about showing you that power is fleeting, that the things you think you've built can crumble just as easily as the lives you've destroyed." With that, he turned and walked to the door, pausing only to say one last thing. "Take some time to think it over, but don't take too long. The clock is ticking." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the silence of my perfect, crumbling world. I couldn't focus after Ezra left. The folder he'd handed me sat on my desk like a ticking bomb. My instinct was to shred it, to pretend this encounter had never happened, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. His words lingered, echoing in my mind. The clock is ticking. The day passed in a blur. Meetings, emails, phone calls. None of it registered. By the time I left the office, it was nearly midnight. The city's lights glowed outside my car window, but all I could see was that folder and Ezra's piercing gray eyes. I told myself I had nothing to worry about. He was bluffing, trying to intimidate me. People like him didn't have the resources or the connections to take down someone like me. Yet deep down, a sliver of doubt gnawed at me. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, determined to put this nonsense behind me. Claire greeted me with her usual efficiency, but there was something off about her expression. "Good morning, Mr. Strathmore," she said, hesitating. "There's something you need to see." "What is it?" I asked, already annoyed. She handed me a tablet, the screen displaying a financial news site. My stomach dropped as I read the headline, "Strathmore Enterprises Under Fire. Allegations of fraud and mismanagement surface." The article detailed a series of accusations against my company, claims of unethical practices, falsified reports, and questionable dealings. It named names, cited documents, and painted me as the villain of a corporate drama. "This is ridiculous," I said, tossing the tablet onto my desk. "Who wrote this garbage?" "Several outlets are picking it up," Claire said cautiously. "And there's more. Some of our investors are asking questions." I clenched my jaw, rage bubbling beneath the surface. "Schedule a meeting with legal and PR. We'll shut this down." "Yes, sir," Claire said, her voice uncertain. But as the day went on, it became clear that this wasn't just a smear campaign. Calls from investors grew more urgent. Clients began pulling contracts. Even the board started demanding answers. That night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in my study, staring at the folder Ezra had given me. I opened it again, forcing myself to read every word. The depth of his preparation was staggering. He hadn't just found weaknesses, he'd exploited them, turning them into weapons. And he wasn't done yet. The next week was a nightmare. Every time I put out one fire, another ignited. Anonymous tips to the media, leaked documents, whispered rumors. It all pointed to one source, Ezra Calloway. But how? How could he have orchestrated this so perfectly? He was one man, one bitter, vengeful man. Yet he was dismantling my empire piece by piece. On Thursday afternoon, Claire walked into my office, her face pale. "Sir, there's someone here to see you," she said quietly. "He doesn't have an appointment, but..." I didn't need her to finish. "Send him in." Ezra walked in, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the chaos he'd unleashed. He sat down across from me, uninvited, and folded his hands on the desk. "Rough week?" he asked, his tone almost sympathetic. I glared at him, my fists clenched. "What do you want, Calloway?" He raised an eyebrow. "I already told you, I want to fix what you've broken." "You mean ruin me?" I spat. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Ruin isn't the goal. Understanding is. Accountability. Growth." "Don't give me that moral high ground crap," I snapped. "This is revenge, plain and simple." "Maybe it started that way," he admitted. But it's more than that now. I don't just want to tear you down. I want you to see the world you've built through the eyes of the people you've crushed to build it. His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I leaned back in my chair, trying to maintain control. And what's your grand plan, Calloway? To bankrupt me? Destroy my reputation? What does that accomplish? He smiled faintly. You'll see. Before I could respond, he stood up and walked to the door. Oh, and Mr. Strathmore, he said, turning back, you might want to check your inbox. When he was gone, I opened my laptop and logged into my email. At the top of my inbox was a message from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "A gift for you." I clicked on it, and my blood ran cold. Attached was a video, a montage of my past decisions. Layoffs, evictions, cutthroat deals, footage of the people affected, their stories narrated in haunting detail. At the end of the video, Ezra's voice played, "Every empire falls, Strathmore. Yours is just the beginning." I closed the laptop and poured another glass of whiskey, my hands shaking. Ezra Calloway wasn't just playing a game. He was rewriting the rules, and I was running out of time. I couldn't sleep that night. Ezra's words echoed in my mind, and the video haunted me. Every image, every story, it was a spotlight on the cracks I'd tried so hard to cover up. My empire was built on power and control, but now both were slipping through my fingers. The next morning, I walked into the office prepared to fight back. I called an emergency meeting with legal, PR, and anyone who could help me weather this storm. But as I entered the boardroom, the silence was deafening. My team avoided eye contact, their expressions grim. Claire was the first to speak. "Sir, there's something else." "What now?" I snapped, barely masking my frustration. She slid a tablet across the table. It displayed another news headline, "Strathmore's Hidden Past, the Scandal That Could Topple an Empire." Below it was a photo of me from 20 years ago, standing outside a foreclosure office. I felt the blood drain from my face. The article detailed one of my earliest deals, a ruthless acquisition that left dozens of families homeless. Back then, I had justified it as a necessary step towards success. Now, it was being spun as the defining moment of my career, a ruthless, cold-blooded businessman with no regard for the people he crushed. "Where did this come from?" I demanded. Claire hesitated. "The sources are anonymous, but the timing isn't a coincidence. Ezra, it had to be him." I slammed my fist on the table. "Find out who leaked this and shut it down." "We're trying," Claire said, her voice shaky. "But the damage is spreading. Investors are panicking. The board is calling for an emergency vote tomorrow." "A vote?" I asked, my voice rising. "On what?" "On whether to remove you as CEO." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, staring at the team I'd built, the people who owed their careers to me, and now they were ready to turn against me. "Get out," I said, my voice cold. They hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. "I said, get out," I roared. One by one, they filed out, leaving me alone in the boardroom. I sat down, my head in my hands. For the first time in years, I felt powerless. Ezra wasn't just dismantling my empire, he was coming for me. That afternoon, I decided to confront him. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to wait for him to strike again. I used the address he'd left on the note and drove out of the city to a small, unassuming building. It wasn't what I expected. No flashy office, no sign of wealth or power. Just a simple space with a single door. I hesitated before knocking. What was I doing here? Begging for mercy? Demanding explanations? I didn't even know anymore. The door opened and there he was, Ezra Calloway, calm as ever, as if he'd been expecting me. "Strathmore," he said, his tone almost amused. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Enough games," I said, pushing past him into the room. "What do you want from me?" Ezra closed the door and leaned against it, his arms crossed. "I think I've made that clear." "You've made a mess," I snapped. "That's what you've done. Do you think this will change anything? Do you think ruining me will fix your life?" My life isn't the one that needs fixing, he said, his voice calm but firm. This isn't about revenge anymore, Strathmore. It's about justice. Justice? I laughed bitterly. You're just a bitter man trying to settle an old score. Ezra walked to a nearby desk and picked up a file. He held it out to me. Read this. I hesitated but took the file. Inside were documents, photos, and letters, evidence of every unethical deal, every family I'd displaced, every corner I'd cut to build my empire. But there was more. Personal stories from people I didn't even remember. Lives I'd destroyed without a second thought. This isn't just about me, Ezra said, his voice softening. It's about the people you've hurt, the lives you've shattered. I closed the file, unable to look at it any longer. Why now? I asked. Why come after me after all these years? Ezra's expression hardened. Because people like you think you're untouchable. You build your empires on the backs of others, and no one ever holds you accountable. Well, I'm holding you accountable. I felt a surge of anger. And what about you? You're no saint, Calloway. You're playing God with my life, ruining everything I've built. How does that make you any better than me? He smiled faintly. Maybe it doesn't, but at least I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. That night, I returned home, exhausted and defeated. I poured myself a drink and sat in the dark, staring at the file Ezra had given me. The stories inside weren't just words on a page, they were ghosts, haunting me with every decision I'd made. For the first time, I began to question everything. My ambition, my success, my empire, was it worth it? At what cost had I achieved it all? The next day, I faced the board. They voted unanimously to remove me as CEO. My name, once synonymous with power and success, was now a cautionary tale. Ezra's plan had worked. He'd torn down everything I'd built, brick by brick. But he wasn't done yet. As I left the building for the last time, a reporter thrust a microphone in my face. Mr. Strathmore, any comment on the allegations against you? I said nothing, but inside I felt a storm brewing. Ezra had taken everything from me, but he hadn't broken me. Not yet. I spent weeks in isolation after losing everything. My name, my reputation, my company, gone. The mansion I'd called home for years now felt like a prison. The silence was deafening, the emptiness unbearable. At first, I blamed Ezra. He'd taken everything from me. But the longer I sat with my thoughts, the more I realized that he hadn't done anything I didn't deserve. Every headline, every expose, every angry face in the crowd, it wasn't Ezra's doing. It was mine. But what could I do now? My empire was gone, and so was the power that came with it. I was just a man, a broken one at that. One morning there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I ignored it. But the knocking continued, persistent and deliberate. Reluctantly, I opened the door. It was Ezra. "Strathmore," he said, his tone calm but firm. "We need to talk." I wanted to slam the door in his face, but something in his eyes stopped me. He wasn't here to gloat. There was no triumph in his expression, only determination. "Fine," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." We sat in the living room, the air thick with tension. I waited for him to speak, but he seemed to be studying me, as if trying to decide whether I was worth his time. Finally, he said, "Do you know why I came after you?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Because you wanted revenge. Because you blame me for what happened to you." Ezra shook his head. "No, revenge was never the goal. If it were, I would have stopped after taking your company. This was about something bigger." "Bigger?" I scoffed. "You ruined me. What more could you possibly want?" "I want you to understand," he said, his voice steady. "I want you to see what your actions have done, not just to me, but to everyone you've hurt." I felt a surge of anger. "And what makes you think I don't understand? Do you think I haven't thought about it?" About the people, the families, the lives I stopped myself, my voice faltering. Ezra's expression softened, but only slightly. That's the first honest thing you've said to me. I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. What do you want from me, Ezra? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to you, to your family, to anyone else who got caught in my path. Is that what you want to hear? No, he said. I don't want your words. I want your actions. Ezra reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. He handed it to me, and I opened it reluctantly. Inside were documents, plans, and proposals for rebuilding the communities I'd torn apart. Affordable housing projects, small business grants, educational programs. What is this? I asked, frowning. It's a chance, he said, to make things right. I laughed bitterly. You think I can fix everything with a few donations? That's not how this works. No, he said firmly. It's not, but it's a start. You have resources, Strathmore, connections, influence. Use them. I stared at the folder, the weight of his words sinking in. He was asking me to do something I'd never done before, take responsibility. Why are you doing this? I asked. Why not just leave me in the dirt? Ezra's gaze hardened. Because I don't want to become you. His words hit me harder than I expected. He wasn't just holding me accountable. He was giving me a chance to prove I could be better. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. Ezra and I worked together, something I never thought I'd say, to begin implementing his plans. I called in favors, used what little influence I had left, and poured my remaining resources into rebuilding the communities I'd once destroyed. It wasn't easy. There were protests, angry confrontations, and moments when I wanted to walk away. But Ezra wouldn't let me. He pushed me, challenged me, and refused to let me give up. And slowly, something began to change. The first time I saw a family move into one of the new housing projects, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not the hollow, self-serving pride that came with wealth and power, but a genuine sense of accomplishment. For the first time, I was building something that mattered, not for myself, but for others. Months later, I stood at the opening ceremony for a new community center. It was a modest building, but it was filled with life. Children laughing, parents chatting, people coming together. Ezra stood beside me, his expression unreadable. Why did you really give me this chance? I asked him quietly. He looked at me, his gaze steady. Because everyone deserves a second chance, even you. That night, as I sat alone in my small apartment, I thought about everything that had happened. My empire was gone, and so was the man I used to be. In his place was someone new, someone still learning, still growing, still trying. I wasn't proud of the man I'd been, but for the first time, I was starting to be proud of the man I was becoming. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. And if you've ever felt like you couldn't change, like your past defined you, remember this. It's never too late to rewrite your story. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for more inspiring tales.